We're going to explore the HTML tables topic, where we are going to look at the elements that are used in the tables and also some of the attributes that are used to make changes and modify the table. Now let's get started with the agenda. Tables are used to represent the data in two-dimensional format, that is in the form of rows and columns. The data in the table are usually represented in the table data cells, where the data is enclosed in the tags td and th, where td represents the table data cell, th represents the table head data cell. Two-dimensional format of arranging the data is possible using tables. Now let's look at some of the elements that are used in the table. First we have the table element, and then we have the caption element, and then the tr, td, th, and then thead and tbody and tfoot. The thead, tbody and tfoot are the three sections of the table. If you could see here, the picture has the head section and then the body section and then the foot section. The table also has the head section, the body section and the foot section, and each of those sections has rows and columns. So in addition to that, we also have the caption element. This caption element gives the title of the table, that is, it can be placed at the top of the table and also can be placed at the bottom of the table by using the attributes that are specified in line to the caption's opening tag. As a reminder, I would like to remind you that tables are block level elements, so you cannot place another block level element into the table except of its kind. That is, we can place one table inside another table, and one table can be placed in the td of the one table. That is, we can place tables inside table. They are block level elements, but we can place the tables itself. And we cannot place another block level elements like divs, paragraphs or any sort of block level elements in the table. If we do so, then those two block level elements will get separated and will be occupying the entire width, and they will be aligned one by one in a column manner. So it is better to avoid using the block level elements in the table, but we can use this table inside another block level element. That is not a problem. We can use this table inside one div, and we can use this table inside another form. We can use this table inside paragraphs, block level elements. Another reminder is, a table must have one or more rows. That is, we can say something as a table when it has some rows and columns, right? A table is usually a two-dimensional format of layout where it has rows and columns, and this row has some cells representing the columns of the table, where this is one column and this is one column and this is whole table. In the first row we have three columns, right? Three columns. And in the second row also we have three columns, that is three cells. In the third row also we have three cells. In this way, each of those rows are having same number of cells, that is same number of columns. If we forgot to specify any of the rows td, then that space would be left empty, and that doesn't look very good, right? That's why we should specify the tds as same number as the previous, that is the total count should be same. When discussing about the col span and row span, it would be clear. Hierarchy of elements, that is, we should know that which element should come first and then which element should come next. If we specify a tr first and then we specify the table and then we specify the td and then we specify the tbody, this is all messy, right? So we have a proper order that we should follow for the table to be specific and aligned properly. Only then the data will be properly organized. So coming to the order of these elements, we have the table at the very first order, where table, and then we have the caption element, which is optional, but it is a good practice to use this caption. And then we have the head section, and then we have the body section, and we have the foot section. And each of these sections can have any number of columns and rows. I mean, the head section can have any number of rows and columns, and body section can have any number of rows and columns, and t foot can also have any number of rows and columns. But overall, the table should have at least one row and one column. We should remember that. Now let's look at the attributes that are used in the table. Based on the different elements, we have different attributes. In the table elements opening tag, you can write these attributes in inline. That is, we can specify the border, we can specify the cell padding, we can specify the cell spacing, and then rules. Let's start with border. The border value specifies the border of the table along with the border for each of the TD elements. If we specify 1 pixels border, then 1 pixel border will be applied to the table as well as the TD cells. And if you specify the 2 pixels, then that value will be affected overall the table. And if you want any of the TD cells border as different from the all the TDs, then you can style it particularly using the selectors, or you can use inline method of stylings. By default, the border value is set to 0, that is none. That means if you open a table element and if you specify some of the rows and columns and specify some data in each of the TD cells, then the table is not going to have a border, but the data is aligned in an orderly manner. If you want to see the borders of the table, then we can specify this border value. Then we have the cell padding. The cell padding is usually used to space the data and the border of the TD. The cell padding value specifies the distance between the contents, the TD's content and the border of the TD. This is known as cell padding. The value specified in the cell padding will affect each and every TD of the table. So be careful with that. If you want the text and the border to be not much space, then you could give a smaller value. By default, there is some value specified and you can overwrite using the cell padding property. And then we have the cell spacing. Cell spacing is usually uh, an synonym of margin, where the cell spacing usually specifies the distance between the, if we consider this as a table and this as my TDs, so there is some space between this table's border and the TD's border. Similarly, there is some space between this TD's border and this TD's border. This distance between the table's border, TD's border and the relative TD's border is known as cell spacing. It gives us the spacing between the borders of each of the TDs and table respectively. So if you want this TD to be aligned very close to this, then you can specify a smaller value. By default, there is some value specified to each of this TD which would make them space evenly. The rules property usually takes these values. So first, all, none, calls, rows and groups. So all means calls plus rows. That is, if you specify the rules as all, then applying the rules to columns and rows. So these rules usually separate the columns and rows, and also some of the column groups and row groups also using this group value. If you specify the rules attribute of the table, then it is going to override the border property and is going to assign a border of 1 pixel. That is, if we specify a table, and it's going to override the properties of that border, and the border property to each of the TDs is going to be overridden. So you cannot uh, view that border value anymore once the rules is specified. Once the rules is specified, the TD's borders are vanished, and we are just going to see, if we specify the columns, then we can see only the y-axis lines, and if you specify the rows, then we are going to see the x-axis lines. And then we have this caption element. Taking the style property, using this style property, we can specify the alignment of this caption. That is, when the table is defined using some of the rows and columns, then if you specify the caption, then that specified caption is going to appear at the top and by default. And if you want that to be aligned at the bottom of the table, then you could use the bottom value. Now coming to TD, that is table data cell, it has got some sort of two properties mainly discussed, that is call span and row span. First of all, the call span. If you have a table and it has some rows and columns, right? So I have this table having 3 rows and 3 columns. So my first row has first element, this is TD. If you specify the TD's call span attribute as call span equals to 2, then it is going to occupy 2 cells in X direction. If you specify the row span value, the row span is equals to 2, then it is going to access these two as one cell. And if you specify those two at a time, then it is going to occupy 2 rows and 2 columns. That is these two columns, and these 2 rows. And now, once you have specified the row span and call span, my first element having specified value of call span is equals to 2 occupies 2 TDs. So I am left with one more TD. That is, overall my first row has 3 cells, where one cell occupying 2 cells plus one more cell. So total all I have 3 cells. That is what I meant in the logical rows should be equal in each of the rows. If I had specified the values of this table having row span 3 for this last column, I mean the last element of the first row occupying 3 rows having the call span attributes value as 3, then it is going to occupy these 3 cells. When coming to the second row, we should specify the TDs as 2 only, because the third TD is already occupied by the previous TD. So we are having one TD here, another TD here. In the third row also we are having 3 TDs, but this TD is occupied by the previous TD. And then we have this TD. So 2 TDs specified in each of these rows. Now let's analyze this table. This table has 4 rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4 rows. And this table has 4 columns. This is 1, this is 2, and this is 3, and this is 4. The first row has a single cell spanning over all the cells, and the second row has 2 cells. The first cell is occupying 2 columns, and the second cell is occupying the 2 columns along with 2 rows. And my third row has 2 cells, 1 and then 2. And my fourth row has 1 TD, and my second TD is occupying the 3 cells. So now this is my T head section as per my declaration, and this is my T body section, and this is my T foot section. So my T head section has 1 row, my T body section has 2 rows, my T foot section has 1 row. Now coming to columns, T head has 1 row and 1 row has 4 columns. Similarly, all the rows. Now, this hierarchy diagram explains the structure of the table, where I have this table, this as my outer table, and then I have my TD, and then I have my TR, that is first row. That first row has a TD cell. That TD cell is occupying 4 columns. So 1, 2, 3, and then 4. Those 4 columns are occupied by that TD. Now coming to my second row has 1 TD, that is this TD occupying 2 columns, and my second cell has 2 columns spanned and 2 rows spanned. So overall I have this call span, this TD as call span 2 and row span 2 occupying 2 columns and 2 rows. Now if you could observe here, this TD has another table embedded in it. So that table is having 2 rows, 1 and 2 rows, and each of those rows are having 4 columns. Now coming to this row, the third row has 2 TDs left. So because this TD has occupied 2 columns and 2 rows, which in turns it is occupying the 2 columns of the next row also. So that's why I'm left with 2 columns. So I specify 2 TDs over there, and then I have the TR, the last row. That last row has the first column, and then the second column spanning over the 3 columns, and those 3 columns are having a table inside them, and that table is having a single row, and that row has 6 cells. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 cells. Now let's look at the code of that table. I have the table and the border value specified, and cell spacing and cell padding is set to 0, and I have the T head section, that is this row, and in that I have the one row, that is single row. It has one T head. So T head. What is this T head? So far we know about the TD, but T head is also a data element, that is the data cell of the table, which has some predefined properties like bold to the text and also text aligned at center. If we specify any text in the T head, then that text is going to be aligned at center, and the text is also having a bold value that is predefined, that we don't need to define that value. Also we can modify that using CSS. Now this TD has a call span value 4, and then background color, I've set the background color as gray, and this is my header. Now coming to the second part, that is the body part, that is T body. This T body part has how many rows? 2 rows. So my first row, and this is my second row, those 2 rows. So my first row has one TD, and that TD is spanning over the 2 columns. And then I have the second TD spanning over 2 rows and 2 rows and 2 columns, this part. And that TD is having a table embedded in itself, that is one table having 2 rows and having 4 columns. Similarly this row has 4 columns. So this is what this table indicates, and it has some border value specified. I just want my this table to occupy the whole space of this width. I just added the width property in the style attribute. This is called inline styling, which we'll be discussing in CSS. The reason I added this is because if you don't give any value in this TDs, then this TD's height and width would be automatic. Their width will be processed in such a way that that width would be enough for that particular content. So that's why we are going to tell that table to occupy the whole space irrespective of the content. So I specified some content over here, and then I added some background color to each of those TDs. Since the background color is same, you could do it in another way also, that is adding this BG color to the table, which would affect the background color to the whole table. And then I have this this another row having 2 columns 1 and 2. And those 2 columns are specified, and I must be having another 2 columns which are previously occupied by the previous TD, so I don't need to specify those TDs in the second row. Now coming to the T food section, the T food section has one TD, that is this TD, and one more TD spanning over the 3 columns, that is call span is equals to 3. And then it has a table, and that table has a single row, and that row has 6 cells, and that table also has some cells padding and cell spacing value set to 0, and background color is light green, where this color would affect all the cells of the table. And if you want the value of any cell to be differing from that table color, then you can change that value using the inline method. So this is our output of the previously displayed code. The header section, T head, having a header, and that header has th as the data cell. So that data cell has the text as bold, and it is aligned at the center. And then in the T body section I have this cell and also this cell, but this cell is occupying the 2 rows and 2 columns. So this is my one, this is my, these are 2 cells of the next row, this is also the another row, another row's first cell, and this cell is occupying the 3 columns. And those 3 columns are also having a single table, that table has a single row and 6 column. That's all for that table. Hope you have enjoyed this video, and if you have any doubts, comment out in the section. Thank you.